Well, Moscow, despite all the statements by Donald Trump and his special envoy Steve Witkoff that they are negotiating. In fact, the United States is ready to sanction Russia. Moscow is now constantly selling the same narrative and doing so publicly that supposedly Ukraine will never join NATO. Any security guarantees. By the way, they've just started changing the wording with the great powers and with Russia's participation itself. Without this, discussing ways to end Russia's war against Ukraine leads nowhere. Meanwhile, Russians keep insisting there's no planned meeting between Putin and Zelensky, no agenda, and nothing is being prepared. And this absolutely, doesn't add up. The positions voiced in Washington are completely different, because in Washington they're trying to convince us that negotiations are underway. They're trying to formalize something, to reach some agreements, to discuss some delicate issues. Does Witkoff talk to the Russians every day? This week, the Ukrainian delegation is flying to New York, where there will be a meeting with the American delegation. The Americans say negotiations are ongoing, while Europeans report that security guarantees for Ukraine are in progress. However, Zelensky said today the process must speed up because it's moving too slowly. Well, and the Russians simply state that nothing is being prepared, and whatever you are preparing, we will never accept. A Zelensky-Putin meeting is not planned. So let's analyze what Moscow is actually trying to convey right now. That's why they started saying that at first they were shouting that security guarantees should only be with the Russians. Now they've started saying that great powers should be involved, apparently hinting at China, although China has stated that it will not send its peacekeeping forces to Ukraine. Let's figure this out. I'm Alexei Pechiy. Today is August 27th. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, write any comment you want, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. I'll begin with a direct quote from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Here, absolutely everything that is very important for Moscow to publicly confirm is present. Lavrov stated, and I quote, "A meeting between Putin and Zelensky is not planned. President Putin is ready to meet with Zelensky when the agenda is prepared." And this agenda is not ready at all. This formula is not the first time we've heard it in the past week. So Moscow is pretending that the door for negotiations is slightly open, but the key to these negotiations is only with Moscow. Like, whatever you Europeans and Americans come up with, it doesn't matter to us at all, only our conditions matter. To this, Trump responds that all of this is just posturing, and in reality, these Russians aren't going anywhere. Next, about who and how should be responsible for Ukraine's security. According to the Kremlin, Lavrov has been repeating the same idea in his recent interviews. His quote, "Security guarantees for Ukraine should be provided by the great powers. Discussing guarantees without Russia is a road to nowhere. Ukraine should be outside of NATO, outside of any military blocs. This must be fixed. We are talking about neutrality and non-nuclear status." Well, to put it simply, Moscow wants the right to veto any future security guarantees for Ukraine. And Moscow demands that Ukraine remain weak after this war, so that Moscow has the opportunity to attack again and so on. At the same time, the issue of Volodymyr Zelensky's legitimacy is constantly being thrown into the information space. Well, this is generally a favorite topic of the Russians. They are always trying to stir it up. But here's the paradox. After Donald Trump's words yesterday that the Russians are doing bullshit and posturing, and that all these statements about legitimacy, about whether they're ready or not to meet, it's all crap. I'm translating. I'm curious how the Russians will get out of this later. Right now they're shouting only this way and no other. Fine. The Americans and Europeans say, no, it will be this way and no other way. And if Trump really does finally start putting economic pressure on Russia, if he really starts strangling the economy of the unwashed Russians, then, well, I'm interested to see how the Kremlin's rhetoric will start to change. And it's even more interesting to see the Russians later, how they'll change their tune, how they'll react when Zelensky suddenly becomes legitimate. For nearly 2 years, they've heard he's not legitimate, but he'll be proven legitimate. Well, the point is basically clear. What is the Kremlin doing? They're just stalling for time, explaining that there's simply no one to talk to right now. Well, there's no one to talk to, well, there's no legitimacy. So what kind of negotiations can there be? Here, the question is for Trump and his team. Sorry, but they're being spat in the face and being told, listen, We've discovered the reason there won't be negotiations. We're ready, but it's not happening because Zelensky is considered illegitimate. And Trump's reaction yesterday was tellingly brief. Quote, "It doesn't matter, everyone is just posturing with this." This is a key marker for the Europeans. Washington is not going to play any procedural arithmetic when it comes to a ceasefire and future security. How does the West respond? NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte spoke in Kyiv and Washington without any embellishments, yes. He clearly stated his position. Quote, "Reliable security guarantees will be important. We are working on defining them so that Russia will never again encroach on a single square kilometer of Ukrainian land." The translation is simple. It is the automatic introduction, for example, of sanctions in the event of new aggression and the automatic activation of those very security guarantees. Instead of all this back and forth about agreeing or not agreeing, needing 48 hours for discussion and so on. In this framework, the United States takes responsibility for the SKY, that means air defense, intelligence, and managing intelligence sharing. Europe is discussing the issue of having troops on the ground. Ukraine's position on this has long been established and sounds the same in different formats. Zelensky repeats this both after his meeting in Washington with Trump and after his meeting with the geneticist Mark Ryud. He insists on guarantees like NATO's Article 5, automatic protection, not just promises, and rejects legalizing the occupied territories. Well, that's it, and here it's important to understand that this isn't toughness for the sake of toughness. You know, like we're just being principled? No. This is the experience of 2022. If you leave the right of veto to the Russian occupiers, then any document turns into nothing, absolutely nothing. Now, why is Moscow so insistent on Russia's participation in Ukraine's security guarantees? Because if a mechanism appears there without its participation, the key will end up in the hands of the coalition of allies. He immediately violated the snapback of sanctions, struck, air defense is being strengthened, arms supplies are coming in, you deploy troops, and the mission of European forces on the ground in Ukraine is activated. All this is happening without coordinating with Moscow, which is just waiting. That's the paradox. The sheer audacity of these unwashed Russians is that they actually expect that now, suddenly, Ukraine, Europe, and America will agree for Ukraine to receive security guarantees from Moscow. The same Moscow that started the war and has been waging it against Ukraine for 11 years. Now, suddenly, we're expected to agree that Russia should help ensure our security. Well, these people are completely out of touch with reality. That's why the Kremlin says that discussing this without us leads nowhere, that we should be the guarantors, that we should hold this key to security guarantees in our own hands. In fact, this is not the end of the war, it's just a transition of this war into a new phase. Again, the issue is that the agenda for the meeting between Putin and Zelensky is reportedly not ready. This is convenient for the Kremlin because it allows them to postpone the conversation to the next week, each time to the next week, to blame the pause in negotiations on some technical talks, saying that we're clarifying something. And this whole pause allows Donald Trump to say, well, okay, let's give Putin another 2 weeks, then another 2 weeks, and then another 2 weeks after that. Why? Well, because the negotiations are ongoing, because there is agreement, something is being sorted out, and so on. Sadly, Putin can manipulate Trump like this for a long time. As we can see, practice has shown that this is the case, and Trump will come out and say, listen, my Steve Witkoff is in contact with Moscow every day, negotiating something, clarifying some details, and so on. That's why I won't impose sanctions for now. In 2 weeks, we'll see. If there is no progress, there will definitely be sanctions. How long have we heard this? Sadly, a long time. But in reality, this is the statement from the Kremlin that the agenda for the meeting between Putin and Zelensky is not ready. This is simply a way to avoid accepting Ukraine's basic demands, to avoid accepting the basic demands of Europe and America, and to buy time. So the essence of the Russian position comes down to 3 points. The first is that Ukraine does not join NATO. Guarantees, but only if Russia controls the key to those guarantees for Ukraine. Moscow holds the key, and a meeting between Putin and Zelensky is possible, but likely only when Trump loses patience. The essence of the Western approach is also simple. Guarantees without a Russian veto and automatic mechanisms. The essence of the Ukrainian strategy is also simple. Security guarantees like Article 5 of the NATO Charter and no legalization of the seized territories. And so, the bargaining is constantly going on between these three positions, so to speak. And that's why it seems to me yesterday's remarks in Washington from Trump and Witkoff are so important, without procedural tricks and with a focus on economic pressure. If these words turn into action, then Moscow will finally begin to feel the consequences of pressure from the West. I'll leave it at that. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe, hit the bell, and like the channel. That's it for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.